Welcome back, everyone, to Stories That Shouldn't Be Told. Tonight's episode is about a family who thought their smart cameras would keep them safe until they realized what was watching them was already closer than they ever imagined. Every story is a warning. Locks, alarms, and cameras can't protect you from what's already inside. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and share it with anyone who loves a good scare. And let me know in the comments, do you believe cameras make you safer, or do they just show you what's waiting in the dark? Your support keeps these stories alive. Now, let's begin. On a quiet Tuesday night in suburban Ohio, a doorbell camera recorded something no homeowner should ever see. What happened that night will make you double-check your locks and question everything you think you know about home security. The homeowner, Mark, had just installed his new smart doorbell camera the week before after hearing about break-ins in neighboring areas. He never expected it would capture something this disturbing so soon. At exactly 11:47 p.m., the motion sensor triggered, sending an alert to his phone. What he saw made his blood run cold. A tall figure in dark clothing stood motionless at the edge of his driveway, just barely visible in the camera's night vision. The person wasn't moving toward the house. They were simply standing there, staring directly at the camera. Mark watched for several minutes, hoping the person would just leave, but they remained perfectly still, like a statue. After what felt like an eternity, the figure began walking toward the front door with unnaturally slow, deliberate steps. Each movement was calculated and eerie, as if they were performing some kind of ritual. The person wore a black hoodie pulled low over their face, making it impossible to see any features. Their hands remained buried deep in their pockets throughout the entire approach. When they reached the door, instead of knocking or ringing the bell, the intruder did something far more unsettling. They pressed their face directly against the door and began whispering something inaudible. Mark could see their lips moving through the camera, but the audio was too muffled to understand. The whispering continued for nearly 10 minutes straight, without any pause or break. Mark was frozen with fear, unsure whether to call the police or wait it out. His wife was upstairs sleeping, and he didn't want to wake their 2 young children. The decision was made for him when the whispering suddenly stopped and the figure stepped back from the door. They tilted their head upward, looking directly into the camera lens, and Mark swears he could see them smiling despite the hood's shadow. What happened next defies all logic. The person reached into their pocket and pulled out what appeared to be a piece of paper. They held it up to the camera, and written in red ink were the words, "I know you're watching." Mark's heart nearly stopped as he realized this wasn't a random break-in attempt. This person knew about the camera and was deliberately taunting him. The intruder then crumpled up the paper and stuffed it through the mail slot in the door. Mark could hear it hit the floor in his entryway. The figure gave one final wave to the camera before turning around and walking away with the same unnaturally slow pace, disappearing into the darkness beyond the camera's range. Mark immediately called the police, but by the time they arrived 20 minutes later, there was no trace of the intruder. The officers searched the property and surrounding area, but found nothing. When Mark retrieved the paper from his entryway, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely unfold it. The message was even more terrifying up close. Written in what looked like blood were the words, "See you tomorrow night." The police took the note as evidence and increased patrols in the area. But Mark couldn't sleep for the rest of the night. He kept checking the camera feed obsessively, jumping at every shadow or movement outside. His wife thought he was overreacting until she saw the footage herself the next morning. She immediately called her mother and asked if they could stay there for a few days. True to their word, the intruder returned the following night. This time, they brought friends. Mark watched in horror as 3 hooded figures approached his house, each carrying what appeared to be bags or backpacks. They surrounded his property, positioning themselves at different points, one at the front door, one at the back gate, and one near the side window where his children's bedroom was located. The coordination was terrifying and suggested this wasn't random vandalism or a typical break-in. These people had studied his house and planned their approach carefully. Mark had already called the police before they even reached his property, having learned his lesson from the previous night. He also woke his wife and told her to get the kids ready to leave through the upstairs window if necessary. The figure at the front door repeated the same ritual as before, pressing their face against the door and whispering inaudibly. But this time, the other 2 began circling the house, testing windows and doors while staying just outside the camera's field of view. Mark could hear them moving around, their footsteps crunching on the gravel pathway, and their whispered communications to each other. After about 15 minutes, all 3 figures suddenly stopped what they were doing and gathered at the front door. They stood in a line facing the camera, and in unison, they all removed their hoods. Mark expected to see faces, but instead, each person wore an identical white mask with no features, no eye holes, no mouth, nothing. Just blank white faces staring directly at him through the camera. They stood there for exactly 5 minutes before putting their hoods back up and walking away in different directions. The police arrived shortly after, but once again found no evidence of their presence. However, this time they discovered something that made everyone's skin crawl: muddy footprints circling the entire house, suggesting the intruders had been there much longer than the camera had captured. Mark decided he wasn't going to be driven from his own home by these masked intruders. Against his wife's protests, he installed additional cameras around the entire property and set up motion-activated floodlights at every entrance. He also purchased a security system that would automatically contact police the moment any motion was detected. For 3 weeks, nothing happened. Mark began to think the intruders had finally given up and moved on to terrorize someone else. His wife started to relax, and the children were sleeping through the night again. They thought their nightmare was finally over. Then came the night that changed everything. Mark woke up to every single security alarm in his house blaring simultaneously. Every motion sensor, every door alarm, every window alert was screaming at once. His phone was buzzing with dozens of notifications from all the cameras around his property. But when he checked the feeds, he saw nothing but static on every single camera. Racing downstairs, Mark could hear his family screaming from the bedrooms above. Through the living room window, he could see dark figures moving around his yard, but they seemed to vanish the moment he tried to focus on them. The floodlights were flashing on and off erratically, creating a strobe effect that made it impossible to see clearly. When the police arrived 10 minutes later, they found Mark's family huddled together in the upstairs bathroom, terrified and shaking. But the most disturbing discovery was what they found written on every window of the house. The same message repeated over and over in what appeared to be condensation. "We're inside now. The house was empty except for Mark's family. All the doors and windows were still locked from the inside, and there was no evidence anyone had actually entered. But the message was there on every piece of glass in the house. Mark's realization that the writing came from inside the windows, not outside, and the security footage from that night was completely corrupted, just static and electronic interference. Mark and his family left that night and never returned. The house stands empty now, and the local police have classified it as an ongoing investigation. But neighbors report that on certain nights, you can still see lights moving inside the abandoned house, and the old doorbell camera occasionally sends notifications to Mark's phone, just a black screen with audio of someone whispering his name over and over again. And that was the end of tonight's story. We're inside now. And that, if this one kept you looking over your shoulder, make sure to like the video, share it with someone who loves a good scare, and subscribe so you never miss another night of horror. Your support keeps these terrifying stories alive, and there are many more waiting to be told. Until next time, sleep with one eye open.